In this video, we'll review coterminal angles. Coterminal angles are angles that share the same initial side and terminal side. That is, angles that will have the same starting and end place, but how they get there may be different. It may go around more than once, or may go in a different direction. Now, how you find coterminal angles? Well, if it's in degrees, you can either add or subtract 360 degrees to the angle, or if it's in radians, you can either add or subtract 2 pi. Now, because you can go around the circle more than once, there are actually an infinite number of both positive and negative coterminal angles for any given angle. So if it's in degrees, we can find the coterminal angle by either adding or subtracting 360n, n being any integer. Again, we can go around more than once. If it's in radians, we can find a coterminal angle by taking the angle theta and adding or subtracting any 2 pi into it. Again, n being any integer. So let's look at two examples. In the first one, it's in degrees. Theta is 160 degrees. Now this is going to be in quadrant 2 because we're more than 90 degrees, but less than 180 degrees. So it's going to look like this. There's theta is 160 degrees. To find the coterminal angles, we are either going to add or subtract 360. So if we take 160 and add 360, we get that it's 520 degrees. If we take 160 and subtract 360 from it, we get negative 200 degrees. Now to draw these ones in, we got to stop and think about what it means. Positive 520 degrees is more than a full circle, so it's going to start on the x-axis and go all the way back to the x-axis, and then go to the terminal side. It's going to look like this red piece here. Again, it starts on the positive x-axis, goes around, all the way to the x-axis again, that's 360 degrees, and then another 160 degrees more till it hits the terminal side of that angle. Now the negative 200 degrees means it's going to start at the positive x-axis, and then instead of going counterclockwise, it'll go clockwise. And it's going to end at that same terminal side. So it's going to look like this blue piece. Notice all three angles start on the x-axis and end at the terminal side. It's how you get there that's different. Alright, 7 pi over 4 is the next angle. Now this is in radians. Now 7 pi over 4 is going to be in quadrant 4. I know this because it's more than pi. Pi would be 4/4, but it's less than 2 pi, which would be 8/4 pi. So because we're more than 4 pi over 4, and less than 8 pi over 4, we know that we're going to be somewhere in quadrants 3 and 4. And the reason it's in 4 is because 3 pi over 2 would be 6 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4 is more than 6 pi over 4. So we're somewhere between 6 pi over 4 and 8 pi over 4. It's going to be right there. Now to find the coterminal angles, we'll either add 2 pi to it, or we'll subtract 2 pi from it. So we're going to take 7 pi over 4 and go plus or minus 2 pi. Now I need to get a common denominator because we have fractions. So 2 pi in terms of a common denominator, something over 4, would be 8 pi over 4. So our coterminal angle will be 7 pi over 4 plus or minus 8 pi over 4. Up top we'll get 7 pi plus 8 pi, and it's going to be over 4. 7 pi plus 8 pi is going to be 15 pi, so we get 15 pi over 4. And then 7 pi minus 8 pi is going to be negative pi, so the other coterminal angle will be negative pi over 4. So our two coterminal angles will be 15 pi over 4 and negative pi over 4. To plot these, 15 pi over 4 is going to be more than a full turn, so it's going to go starting at the x-axis and go all the way back, and then keep going until it hits that terminal side. It'll look like this red piece. Again, it goes all the way around, and then keeps going back to that terminal side again. The negative pi over 4 is going to be a little piece, but it's going to start on the x-axis and just go the other direction. It's going to go clockwise, and it'll be that little blue arc. Now let's look at two more examples. I've got two more angles. Again, one's in degrees, one's in radians, and I'd like for you to try these. Go ahead and pause the video, work them out, and then resume the video when you're ready. I'll give you a moment. Alright, hopefully you've had a chance to do these. Now the first one's a little bit weird. When you try this one, 400 degrees is already more than a full circle. It's more than 360 degrees. So it's going to be the 360 degrees and then 40 degrees more, which means it's in quadrant 1. Looks like this. To find the coterminal angles, we can add or subtract 360 degrees. Now if we add 360 degrees, we get that it's going to be 760 degrees. And if we subtract 360, we get 400 minus 360 is also positive. It's positive 40 degrees. And we haven't met the directions yet. We haven't found a negative coterminal angle. Instead, we found two angles that are both positive. Now plotting, it's going to be easier to use the 40-degree angle. So I need to subtract another 360 degrees to find a negative coterminal angle. So if I take 40 degrees and subtract 360, I get negative 320 degrees. And that would be a negative coterminal angle to 400 degrees. So I could say that both 40 degrees, or the 760 degrees if you prefer, and the negative 320 degrees are both coterminal angles. I'm going to use the 40 degree one because it's easier to plot. All right, so here we go. That would be the 40 degree angle, this blue arc. The negative 320 degrees goes the other direction, so it's going to start on the x-axis and rotate in a clockwise direction to that terminal side, and it's going to look like this. All right, 13 pi over 9. 13 pi over 9 is in quadrant 3. I know it's in quadrant 3 because it's more than pi. That would be 9 pi over 9. But it's not quite to 2 pi. That would be 18 pi over 9. And it's actually less than halfway between those. So it's going to be in quadrant 3. Now to find the coterminal angles, we'll add or subtract 2 pi. To get a common denominator, 2 pi is the same as 18 pi over 9. So we'll take 13 pi over 9, we'll add 18 pi over 9, and then we'll take 13 pi over 9 and subtract 18 pi over 9. So 13 pi plus 18 pi is going to be 31 pi, and that becomes 31 pi over 9. And then when we subtract, 13 pi over 9 minus 18 pi over 9 becomes negative 5 pi over 9. To plot these, 31 pi over 9 is more than a full circle, because that would be 18 pi over 9. So we plot a full circle, and then keep going to that terminal side. It's going to look like this. The negative 5 pi over 9 is going to go in the other direction, and it's going to be a fairly short arc, looking like this. All right, hopefully these videos helped you to watch or understand how to do the coterminal angles, and thank you for watching.